A significant part of your role as a data analyst is communicating results to others through reports. Quarto is one of the most powerful and versatile ways for producing such reports. It allows you to generate dynamic documents that combine text with code and to output those into a range of formats from Word documents to websites. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to use this powerful tool. So let's get started. To get started, we first need to install Quarto. So search Quarto download on your favorite search engine. And the first option from quarto.org should be the correct one. And the website should typically recognize your specific operating environment. Here I'm using a Mac, so it recognizes that I should download the Mac OS version. But in case it doesn't recognize, you can go directly to these links that you see here. Of course, the page may have changed a little bit since we made this video, but as long as you are on the quarto.org page, you should be good. So now I'm going to go ahead and download this Quarto CLI. Click Allow. And I go to my downloads and click on the downloaded file. It should bring up a Quarto installer, and you can just accept all the defaults. Just keep clicking Next, Accept until you get to the end of the installation. And by the way, even if you already have a previous version of Quarto, please still go through these steps to download the most up-to-date version. Now let's see how you can access Quarto from the terminal. If you're on a Mac, just search Terminal, and if you're on Windows, you can search command prompt, and in both cases you can type Quarto --version, and it should show the current version of Quarto. And now we're going to use Quarto to install this other piece of software called TinyTech that allows us to render PDF reports. So let's type Quarto install TinyTech, or TEX, but it's actually pronounced tech. So Quarto install TinyTech. And that is a bit of a large file, so it may take a few minutes to download. Now, once we've installed Quarto and TinyTech, we're going to go ahead and open up our Graph Courses Python folder. So I'll drag Graph Courses Python into my VS Code. Hopefully you remember where you kept that folder. And you should see your testcalc.py script that you created before. Now, for Quarto to work properly with VS Code, we need two extensions. So click on the Extensions tab here of your VS Code. And let's search first for the Quarto extension. So search for Quarto. It should have this check mark from the Quarto org. And once that's done, search also for the Jupyter extension. So Quarto is actually built on top of Jupyter notebooks. So it requires Jupyter. And you should see the check mark from Microsoft. So click on Install. So now we have Quarto, we have TinyTech, we have the extensions for Quarto and Jupyter. We are ready to go. That's a lot of installations, but you should only need to do that once. Now, if you have not yet created a virtual environment for this project, perhaps you didn't watch our previous video, you can go ahead and watch that, but perhaps I'll just quickly go over it. If you don't have a .vem folder in your folder where you are working right now, you need to create that. You can do that by using the command palette in VS Code. Click on the top bar, the Show and Run Commands option. Click on Create Environment and then Create with Venv. Once that's done, then you again go into the command palette, search for a Select Interpreter, point that to Venv, and then you should be good to go. There's one more set of requirements for those who didn't watch our previous video. You need to install a number of packages. Again, this is only if you haven't done this already. So you click to open a new terminal, and then we're going to pip install Plotly, Pandas, Jupyter, IPyKernel, Kaleido, and also iTables. Now we're ready to go. Let's create our first Quarto document. In the Explorer tab here, I'm going to right-click in this empty space, click on New File, and then I'm going to call this First Quarto Doc. And the extension is QMD, which stands for Quarto Markdown. So now type along with me into this Quarto doc. I'm going to put a hashtag or a £, and then type section 1, and then I press enter twice, and I put the text hello. And then I press enter twice again, and let's do a section 2. And under there, let's type world. So this is a header in this Quarto document. This is some text, another header, and some more text. Let's see how to add some code. In order to add some code, I'll press enter twice, and then I'm going to use the shortcut Command-Shift-I. And instead of using the shortcut, you could also click on this ellipsis at the top right of the editor, and you should see an insert code cell option there. But I recommend you memorize that shortcut, so Command-Shift-I for Mac, or if you're on Windows, Control-Shift-I. That opens up a code chunk, which is delineated by 3 backticks, and then an opening brace, and then the language of choice, a closing brace, and then to close the code chunk, we have another 3 backticks. As you can see, the default language is Python, so if you just press enter, then it will go into that Python cell. And in here, let's just type some code. I'm going to type 2 + 2. And you see there's a button above that allows us to run that cell. So I click run the cell. And as long as our necessary packages were installed, we should see the output open up in this interactive window on the right. Now I want you to pause the video and practice that. So add a new code chunk, and into the code chunk, type the code 3 × 3. So hopefully you pause that. Let me go ahead and do that now. So a Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I, and then 3 × 3. So as you've done that, you can also see now there's 2 other buttons. There's Run Above, and there's Run Next Cell. There's 2 additional shortcuts that you should try to memorize when working with VS Code. One of those is Command or Control-Enter to run that code chunk. So for example, let me change this from 3 × 3 to 3 × 4. And you go ahead and do that as well. And then press Control-Enter if you're on Windows, or Command-Enter on Mac while you're within the cell, and that will run this code. So we see the output in that. And now let's type in a second line of code within the same cell so I can show you the second keyboard shortcut. So here I'll just type 4 × 4 perhaps. And so to run just this line of code without running the next line, I can press on Mac Option-Enter or Option-Return. On Windows, that will be Alt-Enter or Alt-Return. So here I type Option-Enter, and that runs just 3 × 4. And then on this line, I can type Option-Enter again, and that runs 4 × 4. So maybe pause the video and get some practice with those keyboard shortcuts. Let's get some more practice by writing a simple for loop. So I'm going to write for number in, and then I'll define a list of 1, 2, 3. Then a colon, then I press enter, and it auto indents for me. I type print number. And now if I want to run just this section of code without running the top one and the bottom one, I need to highlight this code here, just the for loop, and then press Alt-Enter for Windows or Option-Enter for Mac. And so you've seen now I've printed those 3 numbers, 1, 2, 3. So now you see that you can write and run code interactively with Quarto, similar to using Google Colab or to using a Jupyter notebook. But where Quarto really shines is in its ability to take this interactive notebook and render it as a nice document. And it can do this in a wide range of formats. In order to specify the formats, we're going to create what's called a YAML header, which is YAML. It stands for Yet Another Markup Language. It's a humorous name that you probably don't need to remember, but here's how to add it. So I'm going to take my cursor up to the start of the document, press return or enter a few times, and then now I'm going to put 3 hyphens to start the YAML, and I press enter twice and 3 hyphens to close the YAML. And in here is where I'm going to put that YAML. So let's start by putting in a title for our document. We say title, colon, and then within quotes, either single or double quotes, I'm going to type my first Quarto doc. And then I'm going to put an author. You can put your name here. I'm going to put Ken Anuosu. And then the most important thing, I'm going to type format, colon, and HTML. So HTML is what's used to build websites. It's a standard format that we're going to use a lot during this course. So we demonstrate this first. So now we have the YAML. We've specified the format. We need to render this document. To render the document, there's a nice little icon at the top right of your editor, which stands for preview, and we can click on that. And after a few moments, you should see this pop-up Quarto preview that has the output of our document from the left. So let me go ahead and change the zoom to 70%, and let's draw the correspondence between what we see in the source and what we see in the rendered document. So you can see that the title has been rendered there, the author has been rendered as well, Section 1 becomes a nice section header. As you can see, we see both the code and the output of that code for, and same thing for this line of code as well. So these are the key ingredients that we're going to use to create very powerful reports. We have YAML headers, section headers, some text, some code, and then the outputs of that code. And now if you go to your Explorer tab, you should see that there's an HTML file that has been created. You may also see a first Quarto doc files folder. What this means is that this HTML document actually relies on specific files that are in this folder here. But that structure makes it hard to send this HTML file to other people. So we're going to add a new option to force Quarto to embed whatever is in this files folder directly into the HTML. And to do that, I'm going to need to move HTML down to the next line and then press tab. So it needs to be indented relative to format. Hopefully you know where the tab key is on your keyboard. And then I put a colon here. I press enter again and then tab one more time. And then I'll type the following: embed hyphen resources. And there's some autocomplete for me there. And I set that to true. And now I'm going to re-render, and that folder should be gone, and you should have a single HTML file. And so that HTML file there that I can see from VS Code is the same one that I see here in my File Explorer, and I can double click on it to open it in a web browser, for example, and I can also send that to other people. Okay, so we've seen how to make HTML documents. Let's look at some other formats. We start with a PDF, so I say format, :space PDF, and I render. And for me, I actually had an issue with the render the first time, so I had to click on preview or render again. And now I have that nice PDF document. And again, if you look in the Explorer, you can see that PDF has been created, and you could send that to someone. Okay, let's go a bit faster now. I'm going to create a docx. So docx stands for Microsoft Word type document. So format docx. Let's render that. I don't have Microsoft Word installed on this computer, so I can only see it in TextEdit. For the next format, we can use PPTX, which stands for a Microsoft PowerPoint type presentation, and we can render that. And finally, let's try the dashboard format, which we're going to come back to towards the end of the course. And if I zoom out a little bit, you can see that my dashboard lets me have two different tabs, section 1 and section 2. So hopefully now you're starting to see the power of Quarto. You can have a single code file where you do your analysis, but then whenever you want, you can output that to a range of different presentation formats. Now I notice our graph courses folder is getting a bit messy since we have all of those different outputs. So let's actually nest this into a single folder. So within my Explorer tab, I'm going to create now a new folder. So just right click and click on new folder, and let's call it Intro to Quarto. And I'm going to drag all of my Quarto things in there. So let's move those. And you can tell that these are now nested under Quarto, because if I click on this dropdown, they all get absorbed into the Intro to Quarto folder. As you had previously noticed, the Quarto extension is .qmd, which stands for Quarto Markdown. And this gives you a clue to the fact that Quarto lets you use Markdown in order to format your text. So this pound sign that we used here, or this hashtag, is already one example of Markdown. Let me show you some other use cases for Markdown. So in Markdown, a single hashtag like that is a level 1 header. So let's go ahead and type that. I press enter 2 times. And if we have 2 hashtags, that's a level 2 header. And 3 hashtags is a level 3 header. Let's render those as an HTML document so we can see what that looks like. So you can see level 1 header is the largest, then 2, then 3. Now we can italicize and we can embolden with Markdown as well. So let's type Markdown. Let's use italics. And to use those italics, we just put an asterisk before and after the word that we want to italicize, and also embolden text. And to embolden text, you're going to use 2 sets of asterisks. And then you can also define bulleted lists. For this, you just use a single hyphen. So hyphen, and then let's type first element, and then another hyphen and second element. Now let's render all of this to see the output. Okay? So now you can see our italics, our emboldened text, and our first and second element bullets. And you can also add links. And in order to add links, what you do is you wrap the link text in square brackets, and then you open a pair of parentheses, and here I'm going to put a link, https, and then a colon, and then 2 forward slashes, thegraphcourses.org. And if we render this now, you'll see that we have that link. We can click and open that in a browser, and that'll take us to the Graph Courses website. And now from this Graph Courses page, I'm just going to grab one of our images. So I'm going to right click on this one here and click on Save Image As. I'll save that to my Downloads folder, and I'm going to show you how to embed that into the Quarto document. You can use any image that you like for this. And so I'm going to type, you can also embed images. And the syntax for this is similar to the link syntax. So we're going to have square brackets and then parentheses, but importantly, you're going to have a exclamation point before those. So in here is where we're going to put a description of the image. And then here we're going to put a path to that image. But how do we get such a path? So let me go to my Explorer, and then I'm going to, within Intro to Quarto, I right click here and I create a new folder. And I'm going to call it Images. And I'll just simply drag that image from my Downloads folder directly into Images. So that's one nice thing about the interface on VS Code here, is that you can drag things directly into it. So now this TGC Unity image is in my Images folder, or the Images subfolder, which is in the Intro to Quarto subfolder. And then into the parentheses here, I'm going to put the path of that image. And that's the path relative to first Quarto doc. So it's just going to be, in this case, images / and then I can see the option there. I can just click on it. And now let's click to render, and we can see that image has been outputted. So those are the basics of Markdown that you need to know for now. Let's turn our attention now to code chunk options. Code chunk options are ways to modify the behavior of code chunks within your Quarto document. The most important of these is called echo, and let's see how to use echo. So at the start of your code chunk, you type a hashtag or a $, and then the vertical bar symbol, then a space, and then the word echo, and colon. And here we can set this to either true or false. Let's set it to false and see what happens. So focusing on the current output, we can see we have both the code 2 + 2 and the output. But now that we've set echo to false, it's not going to echo the code, but it will still show the output. So let's see that. So now as you can see, we have world and then 4. So world and then the output of this 4. But no 2 + 2. So that means the code doesn't get echoed. We can also set eval to false, and so then the code will be echoed, but it won't be evaluated. So eval is set to false. So let's run that. Now we can see 2 + 2, but no output. So that's code echo and code eval. There are quite a few other chunk options, but we'll point you to the official documentation for Quarto on their website for more details on this. Let's quickly talk about global chunk options. So instead of setting the chunk options in each chunk like this, you can set them at the very top of your script in the YAML. So let's see how to do that. I'm going to delete this from this code chunk. And so within our YAML, I'm going to add another key, which is execute. So execute. And then nicely, we have some suggestions. So we can set echo, for example, to be false throughout the document over here at the top. And now if we render this, none of the code in the document will show up. As you can imagine, this is going to be very useful when you're creating reports for public audiences, because you don't want them to have to see your code. You just want them to see the output of that code. So let's quickly put echo and eval back into this chunk here so that you have a reference if you need to remember it for later. So here we set echo equals false and eval also equals false. Let's also delete section 1 and section 2 from here to neaten out the document. And then let's open a new first level header and call it displaying tables. So we're going to look at nice ways to display tables in your Quarto documents. So by default, pandas data frames, which are the kinds of tables we'll mostly be working with, actually do output in a nice-ish way in Quarto. Let's see this by printing the familiar tips data frame into our document. So I'm going to open a new code chunk. Hopefully you remember the shortcut for that. And I'm going to import Plotly Express. So this should have already been installed into our virtual environment. Plotly.express as px. And we're going to extract the tips data set from that. So tips equals px.data.tips. And let's print that tips data set. So let's run just this cell to make sure that it works. And it says, do we want a new interactive window? Sure. Okay, so that cell indeed works. And now let's render it and see what it looks like on a HTML document. So that looks pretty good, but as you can see, it's a summarized view. It would be nice if we could have a way to see all 244 rows in that single document. And indeed for this, we can use the iTables package, which I also had you install earlier. So rather than importing the whole iTables, we're going to import only one function. So from iTables, import the show function, and we can just wrap tips in show. So show tips. And now we'll get a nice interactive table. So there you go. You have that nice interactive table that shows all 244 entries in the tips dataset. Next, let's talk about displaying plots. So displaying plots. So first, let's create a plot with Plotly. I'm going to create one using the tips dataset. Let's do px.violin and then tips. And we set x equal to the tip amount and y equal to the sex. So we can directly re-render that now, and we should see that plot outputted in our document. Very nice, and it is interactive. And I just remembered that it may be a good idea to set our document to be self-contained again, especially when you have plots, because if you send this HTML document the way it currently is without the first Quarto doc files, and it's not self-contained, then your plots will not work. So hopefully you remember how to make this self-contained. I send HTML to the next line, and then I add a tab. So in this case, the tab is 4 spaces, but you could also use 2 spaces. So let's actually use 2 spaces to match this one. And then a colon, enter, and then another 2 spaces. And then we set embed resources to true. So let's render that again and make sure that the first Quarto doc files thing goes away. Yes, so now it's gone. So now this HTML document is self-contained. I could send that to anyone, and they'll be able to open this on their computer and view the plots and the tables. So this plot should work fine for interactive output, but for static output like a PDF or a docx, it's not going to work. So let me show you how you can save this to a static image so that it works for PDFs and docx's. So let's do a new section and call it displaying static plots. And let's open a new code chunk. And what we're going to do is we'll assign px.violin to an object, which we'll call maybe tips sex. And let me hide my Explorer so I have a bit more space. And then we're going to access the write image method of this object. So tips sex dot write image. And we'll provide the path that we want to write this image to. So let's see, where should we write it to? Let's put it in an outputs folder within Intro to Quarto. So within Intro to Quarto, I'm going to right click and then set up a new folder. And let's call it outputs. And I'll call the image maybe tips by sex.png. And we can just try to run this to make sure it works. So let me first click run above. So I can run some of the code above and then click on run cell. And I don't see my outputs, which means I guess I need to close this Quarto preview so I can see which of these interactives is actually running my code. I think it's this one. So yes, indeed, this seems to have run. Let me check my outputs folder. But I see I saved it here instead of in the outputs. So let me fix that. Maybe I'll leave this mistake in so you can see the difference. So I need to prefix this with outputs / in order for this PNG to go into the outputs folder. So let me run that again. And now you can see tips by sex is within that outputs subfolder. So I can delete this one. And then we're going to use this syntax that we learned earlier for embedding images, this one, to embed that particular file. So in this case, maybe I don't need a description. I can delete that and just leave the square brackets empty. And here I type outputs / and I can click on tips by sex.png. And as you can see, it doesn't allow spaces in here. So those spaces have actually been replaced by this symbol, which stands for spaces. That's actually one of the reasons why in general I avoid spaces in my file names. But in this case, I forgot, but that's fine because it helped me illustrate this point. So now let's click to render all of this. And we may need to switch away from this interactive back to Quarto preview. So let's see, now we should have this interactive image, and we should also have the static one under there. And to demonstrate the utility of the static plot, let's switch from the HTML back to PDF. So format PDF, or you could try docx or PPTX. And now you see in the output PDF that the interactive table and the interactive plot do not show up. It says unable to display output, but we do see the static plot. If you want to show a static view of the table, you could simply just output tips alone. So just output the tips data frame, and that will show up in a PDF output. So you can see what that looks like in the PDF output there. And of course, in a real-world setting, if you're outputting to a PDF, you would remove this code that generates the interactive table and the interactive plots so that you don't have warnings like this in your output document. But I want to leave all that in there so you have a quick reference for later. So congrats on getting through this long video. Let's quickly go through our list of learning objectives. So by now you know how to create and render a Quarto document that includes Python code, text, and images. You recall that the extension for Quarto is .qmd. You remember how to add code using Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I. Hopefully you also remember the syntax for adding an image and for adding links as well. By now you should feel comfortable outputting documents to multiple formats, including HTML, PDF, and Word, amongst others. So that's just changing this format key argument here in the YAML. Hopefully you remember that to make that self-contained, you just put under the HTML another key that says embed resources and set that to true, and you get the self-contained output. By now you should understand basic markdown syntax, including the £sign for headers, the asterisks for italics, and double asterisks for bold. And you should also know how to use local and global code chunk options to control code execution with eval and code output display with the echo parameter as well. Finally, you should know how to use Python packages to display interactive and static tables and figures in your Quarto documents. Now, this is one of those videos I may recommend that you watch at least twice so that you can actually start to integrate this information into your memory. One resource I want to mention is a Quarto cheat sheet, the official Quarto cheat sheet from the Quarto team. If you search on your favorite search engine, Quarto cheat sheet, and then let's click on this one. At the right here, I can see this download PDF button that lets me access this cheat sheet. And here you can see some of the things that we learned. But of course, we're going to keep using Quarto throughout this course, so you'll become more and more familiar with it over time. While the process of getting started with Quarto can be a little bit painful, the payoff over time is going to be immense. I'm sure that this tool is going to become a very useful Swiss Army knife for your data analysis and your reporting. I'm excited to keep progressing on this journey with you. Congrats again, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
For more resources, visit our website, where you can track your progress, access interactive quizzes and lesson notes, and connect with our teachers and other learners like you. And if you'd like a more guided experience, we also offer live online bootcamps with expert help. So join us at thegraphcourses.org to start your learning journey today.